But I don't believe that there's gonna be anything that's gonna take away your PTSD, because every time you start talking about all this bullshit that we've been talking about in this room, my fucking memory banks just start flooding back in. Right. I had to live with it for such a long time, and I tried to wash it out of my mind. I tried fucking everything. And it's nothing that you're gonna forget.
I got in the Army when I was 19. And 1964, and I was in country in 65 and 66, Vietnam, as a helicopter mechanic. One of my best friends, I saw him decapitated by a helicopter blade. And that was the one that got me. I think I was 22 when I got out. And, you know, I knew something was not right emotionally, and I couldn't put my finger on it.
PTSD is basically a collection of symptoms that happen to people after a traumatic event, such as sexual abuse, rape, war, accidents, that kind of thing. And it can be really debilitating for people. There's a significant incidence of suicide, and there's a lot of suffering and disability that comes from living with that.
Someone described PTSD as like having a big broken heart. And I think that's a pretty good description. You bury those emotions that make you human.
Well, historically, the treatments weren't terribly effective. A lot of supportive counseling, a lot of groups discussing feelings. And what's far better is treatments that involve exposure.
Depending on what literature you look at, probably around half the people are not well served. There's also pharmacology. Zoloft and Paxil and other medications kind of help to decrease the intensity of symptoms like anxiety, but they don't tend to get at the root of the problem and really cure the disorder.
I got to the point where I had so many drugs, I just put them in a big bag and threw them away. I said, I don't want to be drugged for the rest of my life. I was kind of, I say desperate, I just wanted to do something. A friend of mine had committed suicide, and I was just tired of kind of carrying the baggage. And I saw this clip on CNN.
This is the place where we do the study, this is where we meet with people, and then this is where we do the MDMA sessions.
Intense psychotherapy, including 8-hour sessions after taking a capsule of MDMA, of ecstasy.
MDMA is methylene dioxymethamphetamine. It produces a reduction of activity in the amygdala, the fear processing part of the brain. It enhances activity in the frontal cortex, where people put things in context. It releases oxytocin and prolactin, which are hormones of bonding and affiliation and love. And the remarkable thing that we've learned about memory is that when you remember something, you have to reconsolidate the memory. You're basically recreating the memory, so that if this memory is linked to fear, and under the influence of MDMA, you can bring back the memory, but the fear response is dampened down. Then when you reconsolidate the memory, it doesn't have that fear to it, and you've been able to put it in context as then and not now.
Well, it's certainly understandable that people don't necessarily realize that this could be a potential therapeutic tool. A lot of people don't know the history.
Most people don't understand that MDMA really began as a therapy drug in the middle 70s and early 80s. And then from that, some people realized that they could make a lot of money selling it in more recreational settings and more public settings. And so it was just inevitable that there would be a crackdown.
The conclusion of the administrative law judge that did the DEA hearings was that it did have medical utility and it should be in Schedule 3, meaning you can't sell it in bars, but doctors can use it. And the DEA administrator overruled that and put it in Schedule 1 anyway. And I felt it was important that we look into this further. No controlled research had been done. We designed a study in which people would have 8-hour all-day sessions with me and Annie, in which we'd give them MDMA and then spend the day with them, helping them process what came up.
I had a very chaotic childhood, and because of that, I was exposed to, a lot of random abuse, sexual abuse. As a child, I had a lot of symptoms. I was anxious, I had sleeplessness, I had vomiting, irritable bowels, but I didn't get any real medical attention until I was like 20. Conventional psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, rapid eye movement therapy, drugs and medication, anything that came through, I would try it with complete abandon. And it seemed like the more I tried, I would uncover more and more stuff would come up to the surface, and then it would start to just get worse.
The first study was inactive placebo compared to MDMA. So some people got inactive placebo with all the same therapy, the same all-day sessions, the exact same approach.
I got placebo, so I was not changed, even though this was the best of the best of the best. I knew that I could come back and I would be getting the medicine 2 months later. Now that's when everything changed.
Well, in our first study, basically, in a nutshell, 25% of the people that got the therapy with placebo were basically free from PTSD at the end, compared to 83% with MDMA. So 83% no longer met criteria for PTSD.
There's a thing called a CAPS score that rates how sick you are. After this last treatment, we did my CAPS evaluation. I came back for the 2-month follow-up to do the CAPS to see what the results of it were. And he comes back and he sits down and he says, "Rachel, you don't have post-traumatic stress disorder anymore. You don't have it."
When I first heard about the studies, I signed up right away, and I got to thinking about it. I mean, it was like 2,400 miles of logistics, there's cost involved. Then I broke it down. I said, well, what do you got, ecstasy and therapist? Hell, I live next to a college town. It's a no-brainer,
The treatments that are sold to us at the VA are high in number and varied in legitimacy, and MDMA is one of them. If a veteran said, listen, I saw this on CNN and this is something I really want to do, why aren't you offering it? It might work, but we don't have the data to support that.
This was my own thing. What they were doing was 2,400 miles away. I said, I've got to deal with what I have. And I didn't have any compunction about it whatsoever. Fortunately, I had a friend of mine's son. He had met some guy in Sacramento who was going down to Los Angeles to score a big bunch. And I was able to get some, and it worked out beautifully. The first time I did it, there's just this blanket of warmth and glowing. I just felt alive again, in touch with my feelings and stuff. And the music was incredible under the influence. And after I did the first session by myself, I felt a noticeable difference. Then I got in touch with somebody I knew as a therapist, explained to him what I was trying to do, and then I did three-hour sessions. And it was extraordinary. I mean, it's just I did in 3 sessions I couldn't do in 30, 40 years.
Well, right now we're in what the FDA calls phase 2, which is a number of small studies. And then hopefully in a couple of years we'll be able to move on to phase 3, which means 200 to 300 people each in multiple sites. And you need 2 of those to then apply to FDA for approval as an indication, as a treatment. if it keeps going well, what we think is going to happen is it would be approved, not that you can give a prescription and people can pick it up at the pharmacy, but that it would be approved for use in specially licensed clinics.
Last year, the VA spent around $5.5 billion on disability payments for over 275,000 vets. They perceive this as a crisis. There's 22 vets on average committing suicide every day. So while the VA has certain therapies that they've developed, there's a pretty strong awareness that there's a substantial number of people for whom these therapies do not work.
The best treatments are cognitive processing therapy and prolonged exposure. We know that these work. It's hard to then say, okay, now that we finally got something that is very effective in 65 to 80% of cases, let's try a far out type of treatment. If somebody were to come along with a treatment that has a lower side effect profile, lower attrition, same effect size, easier to do, well then we'll do that. What I fear though, and what I don't like to see, and what basically just pisses me off, is when people forego the effective evidence-based treatments for the peripheral type treatments that don't have any real evidence, they don't have a great outcome, and then they give up on any treatment. And that bothers me a lot, and that does happen sometimes.
The real issue is, does this help people or not? And if it does, if they're suffering from PTSD and this is a tool that can help them, we should develop it. And even though there's a short-term cost that some people will seek it out on their own and may find impure drugs or not be sufficiently supported, that's not a reason not to develop it into a medicine. And in fact, it's a reason to develop it as quickly as possible.
There is so much enthusiasm from medical students, residents, young therapists that are interested in this field. I mean, just in the last 4 years, I think, the amount of enthusiasm and people wanting to do this and open to it has really changed.
It's funny, I tell people about this and, you know, the veterans and stuff like that, and it just, it goes right over their head, and that they don't understand it, but, you know, just, I sure did. I picked up on it right away. And, you know, when the word gets out, I think things will change.
So what are they treating them with now that you're studying?
Well, if they're looking at using MDMA to cure PTSD, basically.
I don't think there's a cure, but that would be fun.
It is.
Where do we sign up?
There is a cure.